I never thought I'd be the kind of man who sat in his own kitchen pretending to read the newspaper while listening to his wife lie to him on the phone. But that's exactly what I was. 63 years old, retired from 28 years with the City of Ottawa's infrastructure department, sitting at the table my father built before I was born, holding a mug of coffee that had gone cold an hour ago, and listening. She was in the hallway. She thought I couldn't hear her over the morning news. She was wrong. "I'll call you when he leaves for his walk," she said. Then a pause, then a laugh. Quiet, almost private. The kind of laugh I hadn't heard her give me in years. I turned the page of the newspaper. I hadn't read a single word. My name is Douglas. I'm 63, and until about 4 months ago, I thought my life was, if not perfect, then at least honest. My wife and I had been married for 31 years. We had a daughter, our only child, who was 26, working as a junior architect in Toronto, and engaged to be married in the spring. Her fiancé had been part of our lives for 2 years. He came to Thanksgiving. He called me Sir the first few times, then eventually Doug. He seemed decent. He seemed like someone who'd been raised right. I had no reason to think otherwise. My wife, I'll call her my wife because that's what she still legally was at the time, had been what I describe as quietly distant for about a year. Not cold, not cruel, just elsewhere. I chalked it up to the age we were at. Empty nest. Her mother had passed the year before. I thought grief had a way of pulling a person inward, and I gave her that space because I thought that's what love looked like after 31 years. Patient, undemanding. Present without pressing. I was patient. I was present. I was also apparently completely blind. It started with a phone charger. My daughter had come home for a long weekend in October. Just her, not her fiancé. He had a work commitment, she said, some project deadline. She seemed tired when she arrived, quieter than usual, but I assumed it was the drive. She'd taken the 401 from Toronto, which in October can turn 4 hours into 6 without warning. We had dinner. My wife made roast chicken. The conversation was normal, in the way conversations are when someone at the table is working very hard to keep them that way. That night, after my wife had gone to bed, my daughter sat with me in the living room. We watched an old hockey game rerun. She used to love watching hockey with me when she was small, and some habits stay. Around 11, she said she'd forgotten her phone charger in her car and went out to get it. She came back with the charger, but something about her face had changed. She sat down. She didn't pick up her phone. She looked at me for a moment in a way that felt like she was deciding something, and then she said, "Dad, can I ask you something strange?" I said, "Of course." "Has Mom been going out more, like in the afternoons or evenings?" I looked at her. "Why?" She looked down at her hands. I've been trying to call her sometimes, and she doesn't pick up. And when she calls back, she's always vague about where she was. I thought about the phone calls, the hallway, the quiet laugh. "I don't know," I said, which wasn't entirely a lie. I knew something. I didn't know what. My daughter nodded slowly. She said, "Okay," in a way that meant it wasn't okay. Then she went to bed. I sat there until almost 1 in the morning. I want to be precise about what I did next, because I think it matters. I didn't go through her phone. I didn't hire someone. Not yet. I didn't confront her, demand answers, make accusations. I'm not built that way. I grew up in a household where my father said, twice in my entire life, that you don't accuse a person of something you can't prove, and you don't ask a question you're not prepared to hear the answer to. So I waited, and I watched, and I paid attention the way you pay attention when you're not supposed to be watching. Over the next 3 weeks, I started noticing things I had explained the way before. She left the house twice on Tuesday afternoons. She said she was visiting a friend from her book club who'd had hip surgery. The first time I didn't question it. The second time, the friend called our landline while she was supposedly with her, asking if we were coming to the neighborhood potluck in December. I wrote down the date and time of that call on a notepad I kept in my workshop. I noticed she'd started getting her hair done more often. I noticed she'd bought new perfume. Not the one she'd worn for 15 years. Something different, something I didn't recognize. I noticed she slept on her side facing the wall now, which she hadn't done in years. Small things, the kind of things that individually mean nothing and together mean everything. At the end of October, I called my daughter. I didn't tell her what I suspected. I just asked her quietly whether there was anything she felt she needed to tell me. There was a long pause. "Not yet, Dad," she said. I need to know something first. Can you give me a little more time?" I said I could. I didn't sleep much that night. She called me back on a Thursday morning 2 weeks later. I was in the workshop. I could tell from the first word she said, just my name, Dad, that she'd been crying recently, or was close to it. She told me to sit down. She told me that she'd had suspicions for about 3 months, that some small things had been adding up on her end too, not about her mother, but about her fiancé. Unexplained absences. A change in the way he spoke about our family. A weekend work trip to Ottawa, during which he claimed poor reception and barely texted. She told me that 2 weeks before, she'd driven past our street on her way to visit a friend in Canada. She'd seen his car parked outside her house on a Tuesday afternoon. She hadn't told me because she wasn't sure. She needed to be sure. She said, "Dad, I think something's been happening between him and Mom." I sat in the workshop for a long time after I hung up. The space heater hummed. Outside, the maples had gone bare. A neighbor's dog was barking somewhere down the street in that particular way. Dogs bark at nothing, and it just kept going. And I remember thinking, how strange that the world just keeps making it sounds. Here's what people don't understand about a moment like that. The shock isn't loud. It doesn't arrive the way you expect it to. With rage, with immediate clarity, with the urge to break something. It comes in quiet, like cold water rising slowly. You're standing in it before you realize you're wet. I thought about 31 years. The apartment in Vanilla where we lived when we were first married, where the radiator made a sound like a train every night, and we joked that we were sleeping in a railway station the night our daughter was born. The way my wife looked at her for the first time. That particular exhausted wonder that I had never seen on any human face before or since. The way she laughed at my terrible jokes all through our 30s, even when they didn't deserve it. The garden she planted in the backyard every May, religiously, the same 4 kinds of tomatoes, the herbs she dried and hung in the kitchen window. I thought about all of that. And then I thought about his car parked on my street on a Tuesday afternoon. I didn't call her in. I didn't walk into the house and ask. I sat in the workshop with the space heater humming, and I made a decision. Not in anger, not in panic, but in the particular cold clarity that comes when you realize the ground you are standing on was never as solid as you thought. I called my daughter back. I said, "Okay, we do this together. Tell me everything you know." My daughter is sharp. She always has been, methodical, precise, the kind of person who catches things other people miss and files them away quietly without making a scene. She'd always been more like me than like her mother, and I'd always privately considered that a compliment. In the weeks that followed, we were careful. We didn't tip our hand. At family dinners. Yes, there were 2 more. In November, both painful in ways I cannot fully describe. I behaved exactly as I always had. I made the same bad jokes. I talked about the Senator's early season performance. I asked about the wedding venue, the catering, the guest list, with every appearance of genuine interest, while sitting across from a man I now believed was sleeping with my wife. He was smooth, I'll give him that, comfortable in a way that should have bothered me earlier. The kind of young man who takes up space in a room as though the room was already his. He'd always struck me as confident, and I'd respected it. Now I understood it differently. My daughter had a friend, someone she trusted, someone outside the situation, who worked in a field adjacent to insurance and understood documentation. Through that friend, she had found a way to confirm what we already believed. I won't go into every detail. I'll say that we had confirmation by the third week of November. Clear, documented, unambiguous. We also had a lawyer. My daughter had contacted her before she even called me, a family lawyer based in Ottawa, someone a colleague of hers had used during a difficult divorce. I met with her on a Wednesday morning, told her the situation plainly, and within an hour we had begun the preliminary steps. In Canada, in Ontario specifically, a divorce after 30 years of marriage has financial implications that are significant and specific. The matrimonial home, the pension, the division of assets. I had spent 28 years with the city. I had spent 28 years with the city. I had a defined benefit pension. I had savings. I had the house. The same house where I'd sat at that kitchen table with cold coffee, listening to my wife make plans in the hallway. The lawyer was thorough. I was thorough. Between the three of us, myself, my daughter, and the lawyer, we spent 3 weeks ensuring that when the moment came, it would not be improvised. We chose December 12th. My wife had planned a dinner at the house. Her sister was coming, a couple they'd known for years. I knew about the dinner. I had, until 2 weeks before, assumed I would be attending it. Instead, on the morning of December 12th, I left the house early and didn't come back. The papers had been filed the previous Friday. The lawyer had sent formal communication to my wife's email, the one I wasn't supposed to know about, the one my daughter had found. At 9 o'clock that morning, her sister arrived at 6 for a dinner that had quietly, entirely ceased to be what anyone had planned. I wasn't there for any of it. I'd driven to my daughter's apartment in Toronto the night before. I didn't want a scene. I didn't want a confrontation. I didn't want to watch her face when she understood what had happened. I'd given 31 years to this woman. I wasn't going to give her one more moment of myself than I chose to. My daughter made pasta that night. We sat at her small kitchen table, the one she'd had since university, the one with the uneven leg she'd always meant to fix, and we ate, and we talked. And at some point I realized I felt lighter than I had in months. Not happy. Not anywhere near happy, but light, in the way you feel when you've been carrying something for so long you forgot it was weight, and then it's gone. "Are you okay?" she asked. I thought about it honestly. "I will be," I said. "Are you?" She looked at me for a moment. Then she said, "I canceled the engagement last week. Gave back the ring. He doesn't know about any of the legal stuff yet." I hadn't known that either. She hadn't told me because she knew I would have worried about her. That's my daughter. That's who she is. In the weeks after, there were difficult conversations. There always are. Her fiancé, her former fiancé, attempted to make contact with me directly once, in a message that I read once and then handed to the lawyer. My wife called me several times. I spoke to her once, briefly, to confirm I'd received the piece of correspondence she'd sent through her own lawyer. We were both formal. We were both quiet. There was nothing left to say that wasn't already being said through documents. Her sister called me. She was upset, not defending what had happened, but upset in the way that people are when a world they understood stops making sense. I was kind to her. I'd always liked her sister. That wasn't her fault. There were things I had to grieve. I want to be honest about that. I grieved the marriage. Not the one it had apparently been, but the one I'd believed I was in. I grieved the future I'd planned, the retirement years, the trips we'd talked about taking, the grandchildren that were eventually supposed to arrive. I grieved the garden in the backyard, which sounds foolish, but it doesn't feel foolish when you're the one standing at the kitchen window in January looking out at dead stalks in the snow. But here is what I did not do. I did not excuse it. I did not find a reason to understand it into acceptability. I did not tell myself a story where the betrayal was smaller than it was, or where my generosity in forgiving it would make me noble. I am 63 years old, and I am done telling myself comfortable stories about uncomfortable things. By February, the house was sold. It sold quickly. Ottawa's market, even in winter, moves fast for a property like ours. The proceeds were divided according to the settlement. My pension was assessed. My savings were accounted for. It was not a process I enjoyed. It was a process I trusted because I had prepared for it, and because I had a good lawyer, and because my daughter came to every single meeting and sat beside me and took notes in her precise architectural handwriting. I have an apartment now on the west end of the city, on the fourth floor with a view of the river if you stand in the right corner of the living room and crane your neck slightly. It's smaller than the house. It has no workshop and no garden. I have a kitchen table that is not my father's, and I make my coffee in the morning, and I drink it while it's still hot. My daughter calls me every Sunday. Sometimes she comes up for a weekend and we watch hockey, and I make the same bad jokes I've always made. And she laughs at them, and I think about how lucky I am to have raised someone with that kind of loyalty. Her former fiancé is dealing with his own legal situation, which is ongoing and not mine to discuss. My wife has retained counsel. Things proceed the way things proceed, when trust has been formally and irrevocably withdrawn. People ask me, the few I've told, whether I'm angry. I think they expect me to be. I think they expect a man of my age, in a situation like this, to be seething or broken or some version of diminished. I'm not angry. I was angry for a period, and I allowed myself to feel it, because I think refusing to feel it would have been its own kind of dishonesty. But anger at this scale, held too long, becomes a house you live in. I have a perfectly good apartment. I don't need another structure to occupy. I am, more than anything, clear-eyed. For the first time in years, perhaps, I see things without the particular blur that comes from wanting them to be different than they are. My father used to say that a man's dignity is the one thing nobody can take from him. They can only get him to give it away. I held on to mine. I don't say that with arrogance. I say it with the quiet satisfaction of someone who, when it counted, did not lose himself. I turn back toward my own life. That's the whole story. That's the only story worth telling. There's a particular kind of cold that settles in when you realize the life you thought you were living wasn't entirely real. Not the cold of winter. I've lived through 63 Ottawa winters. I know what that feels like. This was something interior, the kind that comes when the story you've been telling yourself turns out to have a different ending than the one you wrote. What happened to me wasn't random. I've thought about that a great deal over these past months. The people who betrayed me didn't become those people overnight. They'd been making small choices, one after another, each one a little easier than the last because the previous one had already been made. That's how trust gets hollowed out, not in one dramatic moment, but incrementally, quietly, in the ordinary hours of an ordinary life. And the consequences that followed were just as incremental, just as quiet, and just as certain. What you build in secret doesn't stay secret. What you take that isn't yours has a way of costing more than you planned. My daughter taught me something through all of this, something I hadn't expected to learn from my own child at 63. She didn't panic. She didn't act on the first wave of feeling. She waited until she was sure, came to me with what she knew, and then we moved carefully and deliberately together. That's a kind of intelligence I don't think you can teach in a classroom. It's the intelligence of someone who understands that how you respond to a hard thing matters as much as the hard thing itself. She could have exploded. She had every right to. Instead, she thought clearly under pressure, and because of that, we came through it with our dignity intact and our position protected. I'm proud of her in a way I find difficult to put into words. I think about the version of myself that might have walked into the kitchen and started shouting, That man would have felt righteous for about 10 minutes and then spent the next 2 years at a disadvantage he created himself. Instead, I sat in a cold workshop and made a decision. I would not let what they did determine how I behaved. That's not passivity. That's the hardest kind of strength there is. The kind that requires you to hold yourself together precisely when everything in you wants to come apart. The house is sold. The papers are filed. I drink my coffee hot now, at a table that's mine, in a city I've lived in my whole life, with a river visible from my window if I stand in the right spot. My daughter calls every Sunday. I used to think resilience was about recovering quickly. I don't think that anymore. I think it's about refusing to become a smaller version of yourself because someone else failed to be the person you believed they were. Douglas didn't shrink. My daughter didn't either. We just kept going, honestly, carefully, together. That, in the end, is the only revenge worth having.